All right, well, it is a pleasure to be here. Those who know me know that I can kind of be a sentimental guy a little bit. I love reminiscing about the past and can sometimes go down rabbit holes and waste a lot of time. I hope not to do that this morning, but I couldn't resist looking back through some old files. Being here yesterday brought back a lot of memories. So the June Sucker Recovery Program started an effort to try to host an annual Utah Lake Symposium. And the first one they held was actually 20 years ago. And I didn't realize that until last night, that kind of like the 20th anniversary of the Utah Lake Symposium. This was so long ago that UVU wasn't even a thing. It was Utah Valley State College. And looking back at this agenda, I know it's probably not the easiest thing to read, but it's funny how many topics we've been talking about still. Of course, carp is on the list, and back in '05, it was, is it even possible to get a handle on this carp population? We made the mayor of Provo at the time, Lewis Billings, come and talk to us. And then for lunch, we fed everyone and made them watch the Utah Lake Legacy documentary, kind of like a forced audience that the June Sucker program was so proud of at that time. One of my favorite memories actually came a few years later, 2008. We had worked so closely with Sam Rushforth on this relationship with UVU to make this symposium happen. And UVU had just finished this new library, beautiful building. We got to move into this lecture hall, this nice auditorium. And one of the reasons we were doing this symposium was to try to generate media coverage so people would know, yeah, there are people who care about Utah Lake and are doing things to try to make it better. Well, this is the media coverage we got. In this satire article in the Salt Lake Tribune, it brings up, in having the symposium, the break table with all the food is sitting out in the kind of the lobby of the library. We take our break, go out there, the food's gone. You know, the students had just wiped it out, and Sam Rushforth was so mad. He did get it refilled, but this was our media coverage of 2008 symposium. So shifting gears, talking a little bit about our agency and who we are. We came up a few times yesterday with the Utah Lake Wetlands Preserve and also the Provo River Delta project, which is what I'll talk about here. We are weird. We get that, and it doesn't make things easier that we have this really long name, Utah Reclamation, Mitigation, and Conservation Commission. We were established, there's an act of Congress that spelled out our name, so really don't have a chance to change it. But the Central Utah Project Completion Act in 1992 was really a game changer when it came to water management in the state of Utah. It gave responsibility for completing the Central Utah project to the Central Utah Water Conservancy District. Took that away from the Bureau of Reclamation, moved it over to a state agency, and there were concerns about, well, how will the environmental mitigation be done? And so our agency, the Mitigation Commission, was established in order to make sure that fish and wildlife mitigation was completed. We're overseen by a group of 5 commissioners who all are Utah residents and all have to be appointed by the president. We're an independent executive branch agency, so we're not put into any specific department. We're not part of Interior. We're not part of Agriculture. We're kind of on our own, and we get involved in a lot of different projects, especially around Utah Lake. We heard about the Wetland Preserve yesterday, and a lot of discussion about the Delta. We did the restoration on Hobble Creek that's further upstream next to Springville City's Community Park. We built the June Sucker Hatchery. We acquired flows to put in the Provo River, all working together with partners in the June Sucker Recovery Program. So shifting gears to what we're really here to talk about, which is the Provo River Delta project. And again, that whole sentimental looking back through the past. We've been working on this thing for 17 years. And I'll get into some of those details, but this has been a long project. And we've been able to do it, again, with all of our partners in the June Sucker Recovery Program, but especially Central Utah Water Conservancy District, which is one of our joint lead agencies, and also the Department of Interior Central Utah Project Completion Act Office. They may have a weirder name than us. But us three agencies have really been the ones to move this forward and get this project done. So why did we need to restore a delta? And it really came back to this fish, this endangered fish that we've heard so much about. As we moved into the late 2000s, around 2008, we were starting to see success in June sucker recovery. Our spawning numbers were increasing, our stock suckers were surviving, and it was an exciting time because it's like, okay, we've got some momentum. We're making progress here. Although our biggest hurdle was we still weren't getting small June sucker to survive. These larval fish weren't able to make it even to survive to become what we would call young of year. And our biggest problem was this backwater in the lower Provo River. So you can see Utah Lake State Park on the left side there, and then the Provo River, the old Provo River, was so channelized and dredged so frequently that it created about a mile-long backwater back up the Provo River. To the point, this, probably don't have time to break this all down, but the top panel here is kind of the longitudinal profile of the Provo River channel, and laid out to match up exactly with the aerial photo. And so when the lake is at compromise, 4,489 feet, as you approach the Center Street Bridge heading into Utah Lake State Park, the river is 15 feet deep there. The deepest part of Utah Lake is 14 feet. So the river is actually more deep than Utah Lake. This created this backwater effect, and we struggled to get larval fish or small fish, meaning June sucker, to get through this backwater and back out into Utah Lake. They would starve, they would be eaten by predators. It wasn't a great condition. And so in 2008, we had a small gathering of some of the joint lead agencies and decision makers of the June Sucker Recovery Program. And in this atmosphere of seeing success, seeing the adult population start to increase, we said, are we really serious about this? Do we really want to recover the species? And we did. We made the decision that we knew the Provo River was a problem. The research had told us that it could be fixed. And so we made the decision to pursue this project. And that's why I say 17 years. And it wasn't always a popular thing. We started our public meetings in 2010, and actually the most well-attended public meeting I've ever been to on Utah Lake was when we were talking about what was going to be done with the remainder of the Provo River Channel. We actually had a protest down at Utah Lake State Park, and the parking lot was full, the building, people were coming out the doors. We couldn't accommodate everybody that had shown up to make comments on that project. And because of the nature of the protest, the people who were opposed were all out in the parking lot, and meanwhile inside, while we're taking in comments, everybody's positive, and so it didn't make for the best dynamic. We ended up having to repeat that meeting again to allow the protesters to get their say in. And at that point, we made the decision, there's no way we could proceed with this project the way we've laid it out. And so we paused the NEPA process and took almost 2 years to hold individual stakeholder meetings about recreation, landowners, about 3 different groups, and some of them met monthly until we identified project alternatives that we could advance forward in the NEPA process. That delayed us quite a bit. But finally in 2015, just to kind of cut to the chase and in the interest of time, we did finalize NEPA and went forward with a project plan. And so about 270 acres delta that we plan to create north of Utah Lake State Park. And our agency also has authorization to do recreational improvements, not only on Utah Lake, but other areas of the state. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to connect this project back to the community. That's kind of my attempt to tie this back to the theme. You know, hat tip to Kevin, who pointed that out this morning. So we had to acquire land. All of the land was acquired on a willing seller basis. And the place where we were building the delta was a historic bay of Utah Lake. Skipper Bay Dike was built back in the 1920s to dry this out and make it possible for grazing and agriculture. We spent almost 3 full years excavating channels and ponds that would later become the Delta. The fill, in a partnership with Provo City, all the dirt we excavated, we hauled to the site that is now the Epic Sports Park that Provo City manages, and that helped them to get that project completed. In March of 2023, we connected the Provo River out to this network of ponds and channels, and it's been this kind of a wild ride since then. 2023 was a huge water year, and after we connected the river to the Delta, it seemed like every week I would get a text message from someone who had flown over Utah Lake and snapped a picture, and that's the lower picture there, of our full Delta. I love that because it's people who seemed like they cared too, which is always nice. So November of 2024, this is right after we opened the project to the public, and we're able to show a lot of the recreational features that we had constructed: a non-motorized boat launch, a wildlife viewing tower, added about 1.2 miles of trail down here. Been very popular ever since that time, and even during the construction, it was difficult to keep people out. We're now focused on finishing up some of the recreational enhancements on the original channel. Right now, we're working on the downstream dam that will stabilize the elevation. In that old channel, we will be adding 3 fishing platforms, 2 non-motorized boat launches. This has taken much longer than we had originally planned. This was supposed to be done a year ago, and due to a lot of different challenges, it looks like it's probably not going to be done until probably after the first of the year. Division of Wildlife Resources has been stocking sport fish into this section of the old channel, trying to help it become a community fishery. As part of the process, we acquired about 3 acres right off of Lakeshore Drive on the east side of Lakeview Parkway. We transferred this land to Provo City and then funded the design and construction of what became Delta Gateway Park. And my favorite aspect of the park are the June sucker climbing and play structures. They're covered in blankets up there because it was raining. Provo City really cared about those. But by far the most popular part of this park is the access down to the river. It used to be very difficult for people to reach the river in this section, and now we opened this back at the end of June, and all through July and August, you couldn't go down here without seeing kids playing down in the river. I think it'll be a wonderful amenity as things move forward. Just to kind of point to some of the other aspects of this project, we had to develop a bird monitoring protocol due to concerns about bird aircraft strike risk. So we are now in year 8 of what I think is the best bird data set that's ever been collected on Utah Lake. And, there's a lot that can be tied back to the Delta, but also a lot that can be said about the larger picture of bird migration and how birds use the lake. We've increased mosquito monitoring down around the Delta and also provided funds to Utah County to assist with control if needed, water quality improvements, and I mentioned the sport fish stocking that DWR has been doing. But just to wrap up, we talk about partners a lot, and our agency depends so much on strong partnerships. And speaking to the larger picture of what does recovering Utah Lake look like, and this is a good example. It's not easy. It takes patience. It takes working with maybe establishing relationships that can become strained at times, but in the end, you come out on top. Provo City was one of our biggest critics and was not a fan of this project at all. In the end, I mentioned the sports park, I mentioned Delta Gateway Park. We've done so many things with Provo City to make this a reality, and that would have been unheard of back in 2010. because we were really on two different extremes in terms of the Delta project. And then finally, I'll just point out, we are managing this currently with Division of Wildlife Resources through a cooperative agreement, and then long-term, we'll transfer this property to the state of Utah for ongoing ownership and maintenance. So I'll cut it off there. I know I'm probably out of time, so thank you.